My name is Alara, and I'm 32 years old. For most of my life, I've worked with soil, stone, and sunlight, shaping landscapes into living art. 3 months ago, my parents, Richard and Margaret, called my upcoming wedding to the love of my life a charming little joke. They informed me they wouldn't be attending, as it would be too embarrassing to endorse such a humble affair. They thought their absence would be my ultimate humiliation. What they didn't know was that their surprise appearance on my wedding day would be their own. The guest list I had assembled wasn't just a collection of friends. It was a secret weapon, and it was about to make them tremble in silence. If you've ever felt like your passion was dismissed as a hobby, or that you could never quite measure up, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And before I tell you how this all unfolded, please hit that like button and subscribe. You're going to want to see how a simple gardener's wedding brought two of the city's biggest socialites to their knees. My story doesn't begin with a dramatic fight, but with a slow, creeping frost that settled over my childhood. I grew up in a house that was more of a museum than a home. It was a pristine, minimalist mansion in the wealthiest part of the city. All white walls, cold marble, and abstract art that cost more than a car. My parents, Richard and Margaret Sterling, weren't just parents, they were curators of a perfect life. My father was a senior partner at a prestigious law firm, a man who measured success in courtroom victories and the vintage of the wine he served. My mother was a professional socialite, her life a carefully orchestrated series of charity galas, board meetings, and lunches with the wives of other important men. In their world, value was external. It was about the right schools, the right connections, the right appearances, and then there was me. I was the wildflower growing in the cracks of their perfectly paved world, while my older brother Julian effortlessly fit their mold, acing his exams, heading to an Ivy League for pre-law, and speaking with our father's practiced, confident cadence. I was always somewhere else. I was in the backyard, my hands caked in mud, studying the way light filtered through the leaves of the ancient oak tree. I wasn't interested in balance sheets. I was fascinated by the balance of a perfectly designed garden. To them, my passion for landscape architecture was a quaint, if slightly dirty, hobby. "It's lovely that you have a little project, dear," my mother would say, handing me a disinfectant wipe as I came inside. When I won a regional award in university for a public park design, my father glanced at the certificate and said, "That's nice, Alara. Did Julian tell you he made the dean's list again?" Every achievement was met with a gentle, dismissive pat on the head before the conversation immediately shifted back to Julian, the golden child, the one who was following the Sterling family blueprint. I remember one particularly stinging moment when I was 22, fresh out of college with a degree in landscape architecture. I'd spent months on my final thesis, a comprehensive plan to revitalize a derelict industrial waterfront into a sustainable, multi-use green space. It was ambitious, and I was immensely proud of it. My parents had grudgingly agreed to attend the final presentation. I watched them from the podium, sitting in the back row. My father checked his watch 3 times, and my mother was discreetly scrolling through her phone. Afterwards, as other parents hugged their graduates, my father clapped me on the shoulder. "Well, that was creative," he said, the word hanging in the air like an insult. "Now that you've gotten this out of your system, we can talk about getting you a real job. I have a friend at the bank who could find a place for you in marketing." He simply couldn't comprehend that this was my real job. The idea of his daughter designing gardens for a living was as alien to him as me deciding to become a street performer. It wasn't prestigious. It didn't come with a corner office or a fancy title. It involved dirt and sweat, and a kind of quiet, patient creativity that they had no language for. So I built my life on my own terms. I started my business, Viridian Designs, with a small loan I took out myself. The first few years were lean. I worked from a tiny desk in the corner of my apartment. My clients were suburban homeowners who wanted new flower beds, and my truck was a beat-up old Ford that shuddered at every red light. During this time, my parents' financial support was non-existent, but their advice was plentiful. "Are you sure you don't want to reconsider that marketing job?" my mother would ask every time I saw her. "It's so much more stable." Meanwhile, they poured resources into Julian. They funded his first startup, a tech venture that failed within a year without blinking. They paid the down payment on his luxury condo. They were constantly introducing him to their influential friends, paving his way. I was never offered the same. I was the artistic one, which in their language was code for the one who will never be financially successful, and is therefore a mild disappointment. They loved me, I suppose, in their own detached way, but they didn't respect me. They saw me as a project they had failed to perfect. This dynamic became the silent, humming engine of our relationship for the next decade. I learned to stop sharing my successes with them because the faint praise was more painful than no praise at all. I built a world for myself that they were not a part of, a world filled with the scent of damp earth, the satisfaction of a blueprint coming to life, and clients who saw the value in what I did. I had a small circle of loyal friends who celebrated my wins and comforted me during my struggles. I was happy, or at least, I had found a way to be happy without the approval I had once so desperately craved. I had accepted my role as the family's eccentric, slightly grubby afterthought, but I never truly understood the depth of their disapproval, the sheer snobbery that lay beneath their polite dismissiveness, until I met Liam. And I never could have imagined that my quiet, unassuming life was about to intersect with theirs in a way that would cause an earthquake. I had thought that by building my own world, I had made myself immune to their judgment, but I was wrong. They were about to show me that their capacity to wound me was far from over, and I had no idea that my greatest triumph was waiting just on the other side of their greatest cruelty. The event that would upend my carefully constructed peace wasn't a tragedy or a windfall of money. It was something far simpler and far more beautiful. It was Liam. I met him on a project. I was designing a complex terraced garden for a wealthy client, a project that required intricate woodwork for pergolas, benches, and retaining walls. The client recommended a carpenter they had used before, a man named Liam O'Connell. The first time he walked onto the job site, it was like a scene from a movie. He was tall and sturdy, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and hands that were strong and calloused but moved with a surprising grace. There was a quiet confidence about him. He didn't speak much, but he listened intently, looking at my blueprints not as instructions, but as a piece of music he was about to play. He understood the rhythm of the design, the way the wood needed to complement the stone, the way a curve in a bench should echo the sweep of a flower bed. Working with him was effortless. We communicated through shared glances and small nods. He smelled of cedar and sawdust, a scent I found more intoxicating than any expensive cologne. We started talking during lunch breaks, sharing thermoses of coffee. I learned he had his own small workshop, that he had learned the trade from his grandfather, and that he saw beauty in the grain of a piece of wood the same way I saw it in the unfurling of a fern. He wasn't impressed by money or status. He was impressed by honesty, hard work, and passion. He was, in every way, the antithesis of my parents' world. And I fell for him, hard and fast. Our love story was quiet and steady, like the deep roots of an old tree. There were no grand, dramatic gestures. There was just the simple, profound joy of finding someone who saw me, truly saw me, for who I was. He admired my muddy hands. He celebrated when I landed a new client. He would listen for hours as I talked excitedly about soil pH and perennial bloom cycles. With him, I didn't feel like a disappointment. I felt like a force of nature. After 2 years of building a life together, he proposed. It was a crisp autumn evening, and we were hiking in our favorite state park. He didn't have a diamond ring. He had carved a small, intricate ring from a piece of dark walnut wood. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I said yes without a moment's hesitation, tears of pure happiness streaming down my face. The first people we wanted to tell were my parents. A small, foolish part of me held on to a flicker of hope. Maybe this would be different. Maybe they would see how happy I was and share in my joy. Liam and I planned a dinner at their house. I wore a simple blue dress that Liam loved, and I felt a nervous excitement fluttering in my stomach. The evening started with the usual pleasantries. My father talked about a recent legal case. My mother discussed an upcoming charity auction. Julian was there, looking bored, occasionally tapping at his phone. Finally, during a lull in the conversation, I took a deep breath. Mom, Dad, Liam and I have some wonderful news to share. I held up my hand, showing them the wooden ring. We're engaged. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. It wasn't a happy, stunned silence. It was a cold, judgmental void. My mother's polite smile froze on her face. My father's eyes narrowed as he stared at the ring on my finger, his expression a mixture of confusion and disgust. A wooden ring? My mother finally said, her voice thin. How rustic. My father turned his attention to Liam, looking him up and down as if he were a piece of faulty equipment. And what exactly are your intentions, young man? What can you offer my daughter? Liam met his gaze calmly. I can offer her my love, my respect, and a lifetime of partnership. I intend to make her happy. My father let out a short, dismissive laugh. Happiness doesn't pay the bills. Alara is used to a certain standard of living. It was a blatant insult, completely ignoring the fact that I had been paying my own bills for a decade. The implication was clear. Liam, the simple carpenter, was not good enough. And the wedding? My mother interjected, her voice dripping with condescension. I suppose you'll be having it in a barn somewhere. Before I could answer, I saw a flicker of an idea in her eyes. A cruel spark. She leaned forward, a saccharine smile on her face. You know, Alara, this is actually perfect. A small, simple wedding for a small, simple life. It's very on brand for you. In Tremble, the conversation spiraled from there. They called my dream of a small, outdoor wedding in a beautiful garden a charming little joke. They questioned Liam's finances, his family background, his education. They made it clear that this engagement was an embarrassment to them. The final blow came as we were getting ready to leave. My father stood up, placing his napkin on the table with an air of finality. Alara, we will not be attending this event. We cannot, in good conscience, put the Sterling family name on something so patently ridiculous. It would be a professional and social humiliation. You are, of course, free to do as you wish, but you will do it without us. I stood there, frozen, the joy of my engagement turning to ash in my mouth. Liam's hand found mine, his grip firm and steady. It was the only thing holding me upright. They weren't just disapproving. They were disowning the most important moment of my life. This wasn't just an opinion. It was a declaration of war on my happiness. And as we walked out into the cold night air, I knew this was more than just a family disagreement. It was a line drawn in the sand. I had thought I could ignore their world, but their world had just decided it would not ignore me. It would try to crush me instead. In the weeks following the disastrous engagement dinner, I tried to retreat back into my world, to focus on the joy of planning a wedding with Liam. I told myself their opinion didn't matter. I told myself their absence would be a blessing. But my parents were not content with simply disapproving from a distance. They began a quiet, insidious campaign to dismantle my happiness piece by piece. The escalation wasn't a single explosion, but a series of calculated poison darts, each one designed to make me question myself, my choices, and my love for Liam. The first incident was subtle, almost laughably so. A week after the announcement, a large, glossy catalog from a high-end wedding planner arrived at my apartment. It was filled with pictures of extravagant ballroom weddings, dresses that cost more than my truck, and guest lists that read like a who's who of the city's elite. There was no note, but I knew exactly who had sent it. It was a message from my mother. This is what a real wedding looks like. This is what you are not. I threw it in the recycling bin, but the message lingered. It was a reminder that in her eyes, my wedding wasn't just different, it was deficient. The second incident was far more direct and far more cruel. My father, it seemed, decided to take a different approach. He called Liam and asked him to meet for a drink, under the guise of clearing the air. Liam, being the good man he is, agreed. He went to the stuffy, wood-paneled club my father favored, a place that reeked of old money and entitlement. My father didn't try to clear the air. He tried to buy my fiancé. He offered Liam a deal. He would give him a substantial sum of money enough to start a large state-of-the-art workshop, completely debt-free. In exchange, Liam would have to walk away from me. She's making a mistake, my father told him, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. She has potential, but you're holding her back. You're anchoring her to a life that's beneath her. Take the money. It's the best thing for everyone. Oh? Liam told me about it the moment he got home. He wasn't angry. He was just sad for me. He doesn't see you, Alara, he said, his voice soft. He doesn't see the strength and brilliance that I see. He just sees a name and a bank account. Liam had, of course, refused the offer instantly. He told my father that my love was worth more than any workshop in the world. My father's response was a cold sneer. You'll regret this, he had said. You'll both regret this. Hearing this, my heart broke a little more. My own father had tried to bribe the love of my life to abandon me. It wasn't about protecting me, it was about controlling the narrative of the Sterling family. The campaign then moved on to my support system. My maid of honor was my best friend since college, Sarah. She's a fiercely loyal, no-nonsense journalist who has been my rock through everything. One afternoon, Sarah called me, her voice tight with fury. You are not going to believe this, she said. Your mother just called me. My mother, in a move of breathtaking audacity, had called Sarah to express her deep concern for my well-being. She painted a picture of me as a lost, confused girl making a terrible life decision under the influence of a manipulative man. She suggested that I was throwing my life away and that Sarah, as my best friend, had a duty to talk some sense into me. She basically asked me to be her spy, Sarah fumed. She wanted me to help her sabotage your wedding from the inside. The nerve of that woman. Sarah, of course, had shut her down immediately. She told my mother in no uncertain terms that I was the happiest she had ever seen me, that Liam was a wonderful man, and that my mother should be ashamed of herself. The conversation ended with my mother coolly stating that Sarah was clearly not a good influence. This was the moment a friend acted as the critical outside voice. Alara, Sarah said, her voice serious. This isn't just snobbery anymore. This is toxic. They are actively trying to hurt you. You need to stop making excuses for them. She was right. I had been trying to frame their behavior as misguided concern, as a clumsy expression of parental love. But it wasn't. It was about power. It was about shame. They were ashamed of me, and they would stop at nothing to avoid the public embarrassment of my wedding. The final phase of their assault was to turn the rest of the family against me. My parents began spreading a carefully curated version of the story to my aunts, uncles, and cousins. In their telling, Liam was a penniless opportunist, and I was a rebellious daughter making a foolish, impulsive choice. They conveniently left out the part about their financial neglect, their constant criticism, and their attempt to bribe Liam. The calls started trickling in. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, called to say she was worried about me. My cousin Mark made a joke about me running off to join the circus. The narrative was set. Alara, the black sheep, was finally going completely off the rails. It was deeply isolating. The few family members who knew me well enough to question the story were quickly silenced or ostracized themselves. My parents were masters at controlling the family message, and I was their primary target. I tried one last time to reason with them. I called my mother, my voice pleading. Mom, can't you just be happy for me? This is all I've ever wanted, to love someone and be loved in return. Why is that so threatening to you? Her response was chillingly calm. Alara, happiness is fleeting. Stability, reputation, security, those are the things that last. You are choosing a fantasy over reality. We are simply trying to protect you from the inevitable disappointment. Oh, you're not protecting me, I whispered, the finality of it all crashing down on me. You're hurting me, she sighed, a long, weary sound of a mother dealing with a difficult child. You're being overly sensitive, dear. You always were. That was it. That was the phrase that had been used to dismiss my feelings my entire life. You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. You're being dramatic. It was the language of emotional manipulation, a way to make me believe that my valid pain was a personal failing. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling. I looked at Liam, who had been listening silently, his expression full of concern. The attempts at sabotage, the bribery, the manipulation of my friends and family, it was all a pattern. And Sarah was right. It was toxic. It was time to stop weathering the storm and start building a fortress. I just didn't realize how soon I would need it, or that their final attack would be so direct and so vicious that it would sever our relationship completely. The 6 months leading up to the wedding were a strange mix of profound joy and simmering anxiety. With Liam by my side, every step of the planning process felt magical. We weren't just planning a party, we were building the first day of our life together, and we were doing it with our own hands. Liam designed and built a beautiful cedar archway for us to be married under. I spent weeks cultivating the perfect blend of wildflowers and native grasses to line the aisle. Our friends pitched in, helping us design invitations, plan the menu with a local farm to table caterer, and string hundreds of fairy lights through the trees. It was a wedding built on love and community, the very things my parents' world lacked. The venue was my masterpiece. It was a sprawling country estate with rolling hills and a beautifully restored 19th century barn. I had spent the better part of a year working with the owners, transforming their overgrown and neglected grounds into a series of breathtaking gardens. There was a formal rose garden, a rustic meadow filled with wildflowers, and a tranquil water garden with a winding stone path. The owners, an elderly couple named George and Mary, had been so thrilled with my work that they offered me the use of the venue for my wedding, free of charge, as a thank you. It was an act of incredible generosity that moved me to tears. This place wasn't just a venue. It was a testament to my work, my passion, and the relationships I had built. All the while, a wall of silence had gone up between my parents and me. After my final, failed attempt to reason with my mother, I stopped calling. They, in turn, made no effort to reach out. The only news I got came in trickles through the family grapevine whispers about how they were planning a European vacation that just so happened to coincide with my wedding date. It was a petty, public display of their disapproval. I tried to focus on the good, to let their toxicity roll off my back. Liam and I were a team, a fortress of two. Every time a new wave of anxiety hit me, he would be there, wrapping his arms around me and reminding me what was real. "This is about us," he would say. "No one else." The Djortnuk Tranli, the final, unforgivable act, came 2 weeks before the wedding. I was on site at the venue, finalizing the lighting plan with the caterer, when my phone rang. It was Mary, the owner of the estate. Her voice, usually so warm and cheerful, was filled with distress and confusion. "Ilara, dear, I just had the most bizarre phone call," she began. "A woman named Margaret Sterling. Your mother, I presume?" My blood ran cold. "Yes, that's my mother." "What did she say?" Mary hesitated. "Well, she told me that the wedding was canceled. She said you were unwell, that you were having some sort of mental breakdown and were not in a fit state to get married. She said that she, as your mother, was taking responsibility for canceling all the arrangements to save you from public embarrassment." I couldn't speak. The phone felt slick in my hand. My mother hadn't just disavowed my wedding, she had actively tried to destroy it. She had lied to a business associate, defamed my character, and weaponized the stereotype of me being the emotional, sensitive daughter to try and paint me as mentally unstable. It was a move of such calculated cruelty that it took my breath away. "Of course, I knew something wasn't right," Mary continued, her voice full of kindness. "You were just here yesterday, as sharp and brilliant as ever. I told her that I would need to hear it from you directly before I canceled anything. I just thought you needed to know what was happening." "Thank you, Mary," I managed to whisper, my voice hoarse. "Thank you for calling me. And no, the wedding is absolutely not canceled." All. After I hung up, I stood there in the middle of the beautiful garden I had created, the scent of lavender and roses thick in the air, and I felt a profound, tectonic shift inside me. For years, I had absorbed their slights, their dismissals, their conditional love. I had contorted myself into smaller shapes to be more palatable to them. I had accepted the narrative that I was too sensitive when I reacted to their cruelty. I had held on to the desperate, childlike hope that one day they would finally see me, approve of me, love me for who I am. In that moment, standing in the sunlight, that hope died, and in its place, Something new and powerful was born. It was a cold, hard certainty. This was not love. This was not family. This was abuse, plain and simple. They were so terrified of the world seeing me choose a life they didn't approve of that they would rather burn it to the ground than let it exist. That was the moment of my awakening. I finally saw them not as my parents, but as two deeply insecure people, so trapped in their prison of appearances that they would sacrifice their own daughter's happiness to maintain the facade. The pain was immense, a deep, grieving sorrow for the parents I wished I had. But beneath the pain, there was something else, a strange, liberating clarity. The fight was over. I was no longer fighting for their approval. I was no longer trying to make them understand. I was done. I walked back to my truck, my steps sure and steady. I pulled out my phone and looked at the picture of Liam and me, his arm around my shoulder, both of us smiling. That was my wallpaper. That was my family. That was my truth. They had tried to cancel my wedding. They had tried to declare me unstable. They had no idea that in doing so, they had just handed me the one thing I needed most, the freedom to stop caring what they thought. And they had absolutely no idea about the secret I was holding, a secret that had been growing quietly for years, just like one of my gardens, and was now perfectly in bloom. The drive home from the venue was a blur. The raw fury and pain from my mother's phone call began to cool and harden into something else. Resolve. For my entire life, I had played defense. I had reacted to their criticisms, absorbed their judgments, and tried to protect my small patch of happiness from their invasive influence. No more. The moment my mother tried to cancel my wedding, she had unknowingly given me permission to go on the offensive. Not an offensive of anger and revenge, but one of quiet, undeniable truth. My secret weapon wasn't a hidden inheritance or a scandalous piece of information. It was something I had been building in plain sight for the last 10 years. It was my work. It was my reputation. It was Viridian Designs. What my parents saw as a little hobby had, over the past few years, blossomed into one of the most sought-after boutique landscape architecture firms in the region. Their deliberate ignorance of my life meant they were completely unaware of my success. They didn't know that my client list had grown from suburban moms to include some of the city's most prominent figures. They didn't know that I had designed the rooftop garden for the Azure, one of the most exclusive new hotels downtown. They didn't know that my work had been discreetly featured in Architectural Digest, not with my name in the headline, but as the credited landscape architect in a feature about a minimalist masterpiece home owned by a reclusive tech billionaire. They didn't know that I had won the prestigious Horizon Award for Innovation in Sustainable Design last year. I had never told them, because I knew it would either be dismissed or, worse, they would try to co-opt it, to claim my success as their own. My most powerful secret weapon, however, was my guest list. When Liam and I sat down to create it, we didn't have a list of family obligations. We had a list of people who had supported us, who had championed our work, and who genuinely cared for us. And because of the world I now moved in, that list was impressive. It included Marcus Thorne, the Pulitzer Prize-winning architectural critic for the City Tribune, a man whose opinion could make or break careers. My parents revered him. They had his books artfully displayed on their coffee table. Marcus had written a glowing review of my work on the Azure Hotel, and we had since developed a warm professional friendship. He and his wife were coming. It included Isabella Rossi, the fiery, brilliant owner of a chain of luxury boutique hotels. I had designed the landscapes for 3 of her properties. She was a self-made woman my parents often spoke of, with a mixture of envy and admiration. She was flying in from New York for the wedding. It included the eccentric tech billionaire Alistair Finch, the owner of the minimalist masterpiece. He was intensely private, but he had taken a liking to me and my work, and to everyone's shock, he had RSVP'd yes. The society pages my mother obsessed over would have a field day if they knew he was attending a barn wedding, and it included dozens of others, renowned architects, celebrated interior designers, a handful of my wealthiest clients, and even a prominent art curator who had commissioned me to design a sculpture garden. These weren't just guests. They were a living, breathing testament to the life I had built, the success I had earned, entirely on my own. They were people whose respect my parents desperately craved. Yet they were coming to celebrate me, the daughter they had written off as a failure. After Mary's call, I went home and laid it all out for Liam. I told him about my mother's attempt to cancel the wedding. I watched his kind face harden with a protective anger I had rarely seen. "That's it," he said, his voice low. "We're done being quiet." Our plan wasn't to create a dramatic scene. It was far more subtle and, I felt, far more powerful. We would simply let the wedding happen. We would let the truth of my life unfold before their eyes. But there was one crucial new element. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my parents would show up. Their curiosity and their pathological fear of being left out of something important would be too strong to resist. They would arrive, uninvited, expecting to see a sad, pathetic little gathering they could gloat about. They would come to witness my failure. Instead, we would let them walk into my greatest success. I called Sarah and told her the entire story, including the details of my guest list. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, followed by a slow, delighted laugh. "Oh, Elara," she said. "This is better than revenge. This is poetry." We made a few strategic adjustments. I hired a professional photographer and, for the first time, a small, discreet PR person Sarah recommended, under the guise of wanting to document the event for my professional portfolio. Her real job was to ensure that if any prominent guests were comfortable with it, the event would be properly noted in the right social and professional circles after the fact. We also arranged for a very clear, elegant seating chart and name cards at every table, ensuring there would be no confusion as to who was in attendance. For the final 2 weeks, I moved with a strange sense of calm. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a quiet, unwavering focus. I was no longer a bride worried about her parents' approval. I was a general preparing for a final, decisive battle. Not with swords and shields, but with beauty, success, and undeniable truth. I finalized the floral arrangements. I had my final dress fitting. Liam put the finishing touches on the beautiful handcrafted wooden tables for the reception. Every detail was a piece of our story, a testament to our love and our craft. The night before the wedding, Liam held me close. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. I thought about the years of being dismissed, of being made to feel small. I thought about the fury and pain of that phone call. And then I thought about the life I had built, the man I was about to marry, and the community of incredible people who were coming to celebrate with us. "I'm ready," I said, and for the first time, I truly was. Let them come. I had spent my life trying to earn a place in their world. Tomorrow they would be uninvited guests in mine. The morning of my wedding dawned bright and clear. The sky a perfect, cloudless blue. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the gardens, carrying the scent of roses and damp earth. There was a magic in the air, a sense of peace and rightness that settled deep in my soul. My bridesmaids, led by the ever-practical Sarah, buzzed around me in the bridal suite, a charmingly restored cottage on the estate grounds. There were no jitters, no last-minute panics. There was only a profound sense of calm. I was about to marry the love of my life, surrounded by people who loved and respected us. It was perfect. As I stepped into my dress, a simple, elegant gown of flowing silk that felt as comfortable as a second skin, Sarah handed me a glass of champagne. "To Elara Sterling O'Connell," she toasted, her eyes shining. "The woman who builds beautiful things and is about to have the most beautiful day." The ceremony was set for 3 p.m. in the wildflower meadow. As the guests began to arrive, I watched from the cottage window. I saw Marcus Thorne, the formidable critic, laughing with his wife as they walked down the path. I saw Isabella Rossi, looking impossibly chic in a sun hat, chatting animatedly with a well-known architect. I saw car after car, not flashy limousines, but understated luxury vehicles, a quiet testament to the caliber of the guests pulling into the designated parking area. At precisely 2:45 p.m., just as I had predicted, a familiar black Mercedes glided up the long driveway, parking slightly away from the others. My parents. They emerged from the car like actors stepping onto a stage, dressed in somber, expensive attire more suited for a funeral than a wedding. My mother clutched her purse like a shield, her face a mask of strained disapproval. My father adjusted his tie, his eyes scanning the scene with a critical, dismissive air. They had come. Sarah, who had been acting as my lookout, gave me a small, firm nod. They're here. Showtime. My parents didn't approach the main gathering. Instead, they lingered at the edge of the meadow, their intention clear: to observe, to judge, and to confirm their own narrative of my failure. From their vantage point, they would have seen a gathering of well-dressed people, a beautiful floral archway, and a string quartet playing softly. They would have been confused. This wasn't the sad, low-budget affair they had imagined. The ceremony was a dream. Walking down the aisle, my eyes were only on Liam. He stood under the cedar arch he had built, his handsome face lit with a love so pure and powerful it took my breath away. We exchanged vows we had written ourselves, promising a lifetime of partnership, respect, and shared creation. As we were pronounced husband and wife, our guests erupted in joyous applause. We walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, showered with dried lavender and rose petals. The reception was held in the grand, restored barn. Its massive doors were thrown open to the gardens. Fairy lights twinkled from the high rafters, and the long, handcrafted tables were adorned with wildflowers and candlelight. As guests found their seats, I watched my parents from across the lawn. They had ventured closer now, drawn in by a mixture of morbid curiosity and social anxiety. They couldn't leave, that would be a scene, but they didn't know how to enter this world that was so clearly mine, yet so alien to them. They stood awkwardly near the entrance, and I saw the exact moment the truth began to dawn on them. My mother picked up a place card from the welcome table. I saw her eyes widen as she read the name, then another, and another. Her perfectly composed mask began to crack. She turned to my father, whispering something, her hand flying to her throat. He took a card, his expression shifting from arrogance to disbelief, and then to a dawning, horrified understanding. This was the moment. Taking a deep breath, and with Liam's hand firmly in mine, I walked over to them. "Mother, Father," I said, my voice even and calm. "What a surprise! I wasn't expecting you." My mother fumbled for words. "Alara, we couldn't miss your wedding day, of course." It was a weak, transparent lie. "Of course," I replied, allowing a small, knowing smile to touch my lips. "I'm so glad you could see it. It's turned out rather well, don't you think?" My father was staring past me, his eyes locked on Marcus Thorne, who was holding court at a nearby table. "Is that Marcus Thorne?" he stammered. "It is," I said brightly. "He's a dear friend. He was so complimentary about my work on the Azure Hotel Gardens. You should read the article." "Ismo." My mother's gaze darted around the room, her face growing paler with each person she recognized. "And Isabella Rossi? What is she doing here?" "Oh, Isabella and I are great friends," I said, my tone light and breezy. "I've designed the grounds for 3 of her properties. She wouldn't miss this for the world. In fact, she's the one who introduced me to Alistair Finch. He's over there, the one talking to the curator from the Museum of Modern Art." Oh, I watched as they followed my gaze, their faces a comical picture of shock and horror. They were trapped in a socialite's nightmare. They were outsiders at an A-list event, hosted by the daughter they had scorned. The people they spent their lives trying to impress were here, not for them, but for me. The joke wedding was, in fact, the most exclusive event of the season, and they weren't even on the guest list. My father finally found his voice, but it was strained, weak. You never told us." "Told you what?" I asked, feigning innocence. "About my work? My clients? My friends? I tried, many times. You just weren't interested. You were too busy advising me to get a real job." The final, crushing blow came from off-stage. Marcus Thorne, seeing me, excused himself from his table and walked over, a warm smile on his face. He completely ignored my parents, his focus entirely on me. "Alara, my dear." The ceremony was breathtaking. "This entire place is a masterpiece. You've outdone yourself," he boomed, kissing me on both cheeks. He then turned to Liam. And you must be the lucky man. A carpenter, I hear? A man who builds. Excellent. A perfect match for a woman who grows. He shook Liam's hand warmly. He then glanced at my parents, a flicker of polite disinterest in his eyes. Richard, Margaret, fancy seeing you here. The curt acknowledgement was a deeper cut than any insult. It relegated them to the status of background scenery. In that moment, they crumbled. The arrogance, the judgment, the condescension, it all evaporated, replaced by a raw, pathetic panic. They were nobodies at their own daughter's wedding. Their power was gone. I had not taken it from them. I had simply built a world where their power was irrelevant. I looked at my parents, at their stunned, silent faces, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not triumph, not even sadness. Just a quiet, peaceful emptiness. The hold they had on me was broken. Please, enjoy the party, I said, my voice gentle but firm. Or don't. It's really up to you. And with that, Liam and I turned and walked away, leaving them standing alone in the doorway, two ghosts at a feast they could see but never be a part of. We walked into the heart of the celebration, into the warmth and the light, surrounded by the family we had chosen and the family we had built. The power wasn't in the confrontation. It was in the simple act of walking away and choosing my own happiness. The rest of the wedding was pure magic. As Liam and I took to the dance floor for our first dance, surrounded by the warm glow of candlelight and the smiling faces of our friends, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The specter of my parents' disapproval, which had haunted me for so long, had vanished. They were still there, physically, for a short while. I caught glimpses of them lingering at the edge of the crowd, looking lost and utterly out of place. They spoke to no one, and no one spoke to them. They were like statues in a garden, cold and still while life bloomed vibrantly all around them. They left before the cake was even cut. There were no goodbyes, no dramatic scenes. They just slipped away, their black Mercedes disappearing down the driveway as quietly as it had arrived. Their departure wasn't a wound. It was a relief, the final exhalation of a breath I had been holding my entire life. With them gone, the celebration felt even more joyful, more free. We laughed, we danced, we drank champagne under the stars. My friends and clients mingled effortlessly, bound by their shared affection for Liam and me. I listened as one of the city's top real estate developers asked Liam about his custom woodwork, and I watched as Isabella Rossi pulled Sarah aside, telling her she had a sharp eye and should consider a career in PR. It was a night of connection, of community, of joy untainted by judgment. The next morning, Liam and I left for our honeymoon 2 weeks in a secluded cabin in the mountains of Vermont, with no cell service and nothing but a fireplace, a stack of books, and each other. It was a time of profound peace. We hiked during the day and talked late into the night. It was during one of these conversations that the first ripple of the aftermath reached us. I turned on my phone for the first time in days, just to let Sarah know we were safe, and saw a flood of notifications. There were dozens of missed calls and frantic text messages from my mother, my father, and even my brother, Julian. They ranged in tone from furious to pleading. From Mother, "How could you embarrass us like that, Alara? You intentionally humiliated us." From Father, "You need to call me immediately. We need to discuss the damage you have done to this family's reputation." From Julian, "What the hell was that? I'm getting calls from people asking why I wasn't at my own sister's event of the year. You've made us all look like fools." Mixed in with these were messages from guests, gushing about the beautiful wedding. There was an email from Marcus Thorne's assistant, asking if I would be willing to sit for an interview for a feature he was writing on the new guard of artisanal design. There was a text from Isabella Rossi with a picture of her and Liam, captioned, "My favorite power couple. Let's talk about the gardens for my new property in Napa when you're back." I showed the messages to Liam. He read the frantic texts from my family, then looked at the positive, exciting messages from my friends and colleagues. He smiled. "It looks like you have a choice to make," he said. "Which world do you want to live in?" The answer was clear. I typed out a single, simple response and sent it as a group message to my parents and brother. "I am on my honeymoon. I will not be discussing this now. I will contact you when I am ready, and when you are ready to have a conversation based on respect and a genuine apology for your behavior. Until then, I need space. Then, I turned my phone off. The sense of freedom was exhilarating. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to their drama. I was setting the terms. I was taking control. When we returned home 2 weeks later, our small apartment felt different. It felt like a temporary station on the way to somewhere new. The buzz from the wedding had not died down. It had amplified. My business email was flooded with inquiries. The small PR firm Sarah recommended had fielded calls from 3 different lifestyle magazines. It turned out that a few prominent guests had posted pictures on their private social media, and the secret wedding of the humble landscape architect had become the talk of the town. The contrast between my burgeoning professional life and the silence from my family was stark. They respected my boundary. They didn't call. But I knew this wasn't an act of respect. It was an act of strategic retreat. They were regrouping, trying to figure out how to handle this new version of me, the one who wasn't a disappointment, but a sudden, unexpected success. They didn't know how to interact with me without the familiar dynamic of condescension. Liam and I started looking for a new home. We dreamed of a place with land, a place where I could have a large greenhouse and he could build his dream workshop. The life we had talked about, the one that had felt like a distant dream, suddenly felt within reach. The wedding had not just been a celebration of our love. It had been a launchpad for our future. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The initial anger and hurt toward my parents had faded, replaced by a kind of sad clarity. They hadn't changed, but I had. I had stopped needing them to. I was building my own foundation, both literally and figuratively, a foundation made of stronger stuff than their conditional approval. I was finally, truly, standing on my own ground. 1 year to the day after our wedding, Liam and I stood on the porch of our new home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. We weren't in the city anymore. We had bought a beautiful old farmhouse on 10 acres of rolling hills about an hour outside of town. It had a wraparound porch, a giant, creaky barn, and fields that sloped down to a meandering creek. It was a landscape architect's dream. Liam had transformed the old barn into a magnificent workshop, a cathedral of wood and light, where the scent of sawdust was always in the air. He was busier than ever, turning down more work than he accepted, choosing only the projects that sparked his creativity. My own business, Viridian Designs, had grown beyond my wildest expectations. The feature in Architectural Digest that resulted from Marcus Thorne's post-wedding interview had opened doors I never knew existed. I was now working on international projects, consulting on large-scale sustainable developments, and had hired a small, talented team to help me manage the workload. I had even started a small foundation to provide scholarships for aspiring female landscape architects from low-income backgrounds. We were partners in every sense of the word, building our business and our life side by side. Our life was full, not of the things my parents valued, but of purpose, creativity, and a deep, abiding love. The justice for what my parents had done wasn't a dramatic act of revenge. It was a quiet, organic unfolding of consequences. Their social standing, which they had guarded so jealously, took a significant hit. The story of the wedding had, despite my discretion, trickled through the city's elite circles. The narrative wasn't what my parents had feared. It was far worse. It wasn't that their daughter had an embarrassing wedding. It was that their brilliant, successful daughter had a stunning wedding, and they hadn't been important enough to be properly included. They were seen not as disapproving patriarchs, but as out-of-touch, irrelevant figures who didn't even realize the rising star they had in their own family. They were in a social checkmate. To criticize me now would be to criticize someone admired by the very people they sought to impress. To praise me would be to admit how wrong they had been for decades. So, they chose silence. Their relationship with my brother, Julian, had also soured. His second tech startup had failed, and when he went to our father for another bailout, he was met with a surprising refusal. My father, perhaps for the first time, saw his golden child's repeated failures in the harsh light of my own hard-won success. The automatic, unconditional support was gone. Julian, I heard through the grapevine, was resentful, blaming me for changing them. For 6 months after the wedding, I had no contact with my parents. The silence was a balm. Then, one day, a handwritten letter arrived. It was from my mother. It was not the defensive, self-serving screed I might have expected. It was short, and the handwriting was shaky. "Dear Ilara," it read, "your father and I were at the symphony last night. We saw Marcus Thorne. He spent 10 minutes telling us how your design for the new concert hall gardens is revolutionary. He called you a visionary." We just stood there and nodded. We had nothing to add because we know nothing about your life. We have spent a year in a world that suddenly values you, and we find ourselves on the outside. We were wrong. We are sorry. We would like to see you, if you would let us. It was the apology I had waited my whole life for. And strangely, when it finally came, I found that I didn't need it as desperately as I once had. My self-worth was no longer tied to their validation. I talked it over with Liam. "What do you want to do?" he asked, his support unwavering. "I want to see them," I said, surprising myself. "Not for them, for me. I want to see if we can build something new, on new ground." We invited them to our farmhouse. The first visit was achingly awkward. They walked through my gardens, the ones I had poured my heart into, and looked at Liam's workshop, at the beautiful furniture he was creating. They saw the life we had built, a life of substance and beauty that had nothing to do with their world of status and prestige. My father, a man I had never seen admit fault, looked at Liam and said, "The work you do, it's incredible." "I was a fool," my mother cried quietly as she looked at the photos on our mantelpiece, pictures from our wedding, filled with smiling faces, none of which were hers. That dinner was the start of a slow, fragile rebuilding. Our relationship would never be what it once was. The years of hurt couldn't be erased. But we were establishing new boundaries. They were learning to interact with me as an equal, to respect my husband, and to show genuine interest in my life. They were starting to understand that my dirty hobby had built a world far more beautiful and enduring than their sterile mansion ever could be. The new dynamic was tested when they finally met my chosen family. I hosted a small garden party for my birthday, and invited Marcus, Isabella, and my other close friends. This time, my parents came as invited guests. They were quiet, observant, and for the first time, they seemed to be genuinely trying to understand my world. I watched my father have a long, animated conversation with Liam about the structural integrity of a new pergola, and I saw my mother listening intently as Isabella described her latest trip, not as a social rival, but as someone she might learn from. It was not a fairy tale ending where everyone changed overnight. It was something far more real and far more difficult, the beginning of a long, conscious effort to heal. The justice wasn't in their punishment, but in their slow, humbling education. They were forced to learn the lesson that I had been forced to learn long ago, that respect is not given, it is earned, and that a person's worth is not measured by their name or their bank account, but by the beauty they create and the love they build. Looking back on that tumultuous year, as I stand here on the porch of the home I built, both literally and figuratively, the greatest lesson I learned wasn't about them, it was about me. For so long, I had seen my sensitivity, my quiet nature, and my love for the earth as weaknesses in their world. I had unconsciously accepted their definition of strength, loud, aggressive, corporate, and found myself wanting. The journey of the wedding, the pain of their rejection, and the triumph of that day forced me to redefine strength on my own terms. I learned that true strength isn't about imposing your will on others. It's the quiet resilience of a seed pushing its way through concrete. It's the patience to cultivate something beautiful over years, even when no one else sees its potential. It's the courage to build a life that is authentic to you, even if it's invisible or incomprehensible to the people whose approval you crave most. My parents thought my wedding was a joke because they were measuring it with the wrong ruler. They were looking for the price tag when they should have been looking at the value. The ultimate irony is that in trying to shame me for my simple life, they exposed the profound poverty of their own. Their world was built on a fragile foundation of what other people thought. My world is built on the solid ground of what I can create with my own two hands. When the storm came, their foundation crumbled, while mine held firm. The guest list didn't make them tremble because of the fame or the money those people represented. It made them tremble because it was a reflection of a world of mutual respect and genuine connection, a world they had access to only through me, the daughter they had cast aside. They trembled because they finally saw, in undeniable terms, that I didn't need them, but a part of them, the part that craved real connection, desperately needed me. I also learned that family is not always the one you are born into. It's the one you build. It's the friend who defends you, the mentor who champions you, the partner who sees your soul and loves it unconditionally. Liam and I, along with our incredible circle of friends and colleagues, we are a family. We are a family bound, not by blood or obligation, but by shared values and a commitment to helping each other grow. My relationship with my parents is healing, yes, but it will forever be different. It is now a relationship with boundaries, built on the hard-won soil of self-respect. The greatest gift my parents ever gave me, unintentionally, was their rejection. It was the catalyst that forced me to stop looking outward for validation and to finally, fully, inhabit my own life. It forced me to see that the garden I needed to tend to most carefully was my own sense of self-worth. And now, it is thriving. So I want to ask you, have you ever had to make a difficult choice to honor your own path, even if it meant disappointing those you love? What did you learn about yourself in that process? Please, share your stories in the comments below. I read them, and they remind us all that we are not alone in these struggles. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our community for more real-life stories about overcoming challenges and finding your own strength. And don't forget to share this video with someone who might need a reminder that their worth is not determined by anyone else's opinion. Thank you for listening. Remember, sometimes the most beautiful lives are the ones that are grown in the spaces where others said nothing could bloom. Build your garden, and never be afraid to let it shine.